Friends, welcome back. We're glad you're here. Carrie, as always, I'm delighted to have you back.
Good to be back.
Yeah. So we've got a terrific novel to talk about in this dialogue, Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse Five. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I've always liked the book a lot, and Carrie and I are going to bat it around a little bit, as you might imagine, as you're used to by now. With the novel dialogues, as you remember, we have excerpts of writings from critics. So we're going to follow that format with Slaughterhouse Five as we have with Howard's End and The Awakening earlier in the course. So bear with me while I read our first excerpt. And let's brace ourselves, Carrie, all right? The question of novelistic form is equated in Slaughterhouse Five with the task of writing about Dresden. You guys know that Dresden book that Vonnegut's talking about in chapter 1, right? The reader is forced to consider the very nature of the book that he is involved in through reading. Right? Just as Vonnegut forces himself to look squarely at his hellish knowledge. Survival is what Slaughterhouse Five is all about. And so, to take up the question of the novel's survival links form to action. Form and content, right, friends? Yeah? The problem of living through the firebombing of Dresden is rivaled by the problem of writing about it. And that's from Richard Giannone. So, interesting snippet there. I guess it brings up the question of form, which I think is what we bump into first with this, Carrie, with this novel.
This is definitely a novel that experiments with form. It's not your traditional, we have the beginning, here's the middle, we've got some kind of big action here.
I don't think we've got that old Freitag pyramid.
Right, no, we don't.
Yeah,
we don't have that at all.
Remember we talked about that, you guys? The action rises, we have a climax, it falls down to the denouement. We don't have that here. I don't know, how's it go, Carrie? I've got something like this.
That's about as good as I could get.
With the frame on each end, right? Yeah,
right.
We talked about the frame novel thing before. In some ways, that first chapter maybe sets up a lot of the things.
It sets the stage. Mm-hmm. It sets the stage, and we also see some personalization of Vonnegut's through that.
Yeah. What do you make of his breaking into the story like that? You know, first of all, you know, including himself very prominently, he is chapter 1, and then he breaks into the story later.
You know, I think that what Vonnegut's doing there is showing us just exactly how difficult it is to write about an event as catastrophic as the bombing of Dresden, and that it's not an easy story to tell, and he, as the writer and as a survivor of the bombing of Dresden, it's a very difficult story for him to tell as well. Mm-hmm. And I think the interruptions, his insertion of himself, is part of that. Yeah.
And maybe it adds some humanity to the book too, because as we'll talk about a little later, I think, about Vonnegut's characterizations, these characters are like cartoons. I think you guys will agree. I mean, he's not giving us great depth. Some critics have argued even that Vonnegut is somewhat unkind or unsympathetic to his characters, and maybe doesn't respect them enough, which is a question maybe we'll bring up later, Carrie. Right. But yeah, interesting indeed. Is the conventional novel dead then? Vonnegut's chosen an unusual structure here. Is the conventional novel dead? Certainly it's alluded to in the book.
It's not dead.
Okay.
I would
alive and well.
Very much argue against that. What we see is more experimentation with novels and the conventions of the novel form. Toni Morrison is going to do that to us in our last novel.
A great one, yeah.
Excellent novel, but we have the conventions of the novel turned on its ear in that particular book. But people still want the nice, fun summer beach read, if you will. The novel that will start, you'll have a conflict, you have a nice, happy, romantic scene, and then a good, fluffy ending. Or the detective fiction work that people still want to read.
Popular literature.
Popular literature.
Yeah.
And is the novel dead as a form for the classic literature? No. There's still really good classic literature coming out. Good
point. I think with forms, one thing that the artist does, if he or she thinks about it, is we're honoring the past if we stay in the old forms. And certainly any blues musician will tell you that. Certainly Sonny told us that in Sonny's Blues. That's one of the lessons of that, is one of the ways you honor your past if you're an artist is to keep to that tradition. And those of you who are music fans out there know from the blues and from jazz, it relies heavily, those genres rely heavily on keeping touch with that past, honoring it, almost through imitation.
And also honoring it, but amending it with the sort of melodic notes that are contemporary.
I agree with you. And speaking, you know, actually of conventional forms, I would argue here, you know, that we talked about, you know, Vonnegut doesn't really follow that conventional Freitag triangle, Freitag pyramid. You know, in a way he does if you look closely. And I don't think we talked about this yet in any of the lectures. There is a point where Billy does not time travel. where he literally remembers the firebombing of Dresden. There's none of this Tralfamadore stuff or this time jumping. He literally remembers it, not via time travel, his coping mechanism, but literally remembers it, and it is placed almost 3/4 of the way. I don't know if you guys noticed it, almost 3/4 of the way through the novel. It's almost as if clever old Vonnegut has buried his Freytag triangle, his Freytag pyramid, in the seeming cacophony of repetitions and craziness and time travel and coping and fragmentation.
Do you think perhaps he does that because what we're talking about is unthinkable, horrific,
oh, that's good.
And the reason he can only do a very small amount of that traditional Freytag triangle in incorporating the actual reality is because to look at it for 600 pages, 400 pages, whatever this novel was, constantly in that mode without some of the comic relief of the Tralfamadorns.
Good point.
Thrown in, I think that we have...
The book would be unbearable.
Yes.
The book would be unbearable.
It would.
And in fact, later on, we're going to have, you alluded to Toni Morrison's Beloved, a superb novel that we'll be reading a little later on in the class. That's another attempt by an artist, a writer, to deal with the unthinkable in human history. And this, of course, is the sad and horrifying legacy of slavery in the United States. So I think that is something that artists grapple with. And I give them a big thumbs up for doing so, and thank goodness we do have art. Of course, you're talking, up here with a couple of English majors, but I'm hoping you guys, feel the same way, that art can at least help us a little bit to understand what is the unthinkable sometimes in our human history. And I think partly that's what Vonnegut's doing, through a lot of laughter, and I think some buried tears in this book as well. Yeah,
absolutely.
Very interesting indeed. Let's do our next quotation, shall we? The character who is developed the most fully in the novel is Vonnegut himself. Well, maybe so. Let's go on. This is why Vonnegut can get away with repeating the phrase, "so it goes," after every tragic or pathetic incident. He has established himself through his preface, that will really be chapter 1, is what this writer is referring to, as one of the characters in the book. He is a human voice, not just that of an omniscient narrator, and this in itself adds poignancy, right? Great feeling to the inhuman acts his subject matter forces him to describe. That from James Lundquist. So maybe some things for us to mull over here, Carrie. Let's talk about the cartoon-like characters.
Right. When you see Billy in his silver boots and blue neck sarong, he is almost given rather Christ-like qualities in some ways, but he's also the comic effect of the silver boots and his wardrobe, the woman's coat that he was given because the guards were making fun of him and mocking him.
He's an anti-hero.
Exactly, he's an anti-hero here. So I think that that's one that clearly gets presented.
Does Vonnegut really treat any of the characters well? Does he make fun of all of them? That's a charge that some critics have made. And readers, I don't know what you guys think about it. I love the book. I mean, I'm a big Vonnegut fan. I think he's a lot of fun. But I wonder sometimes about his treatment of his characters. He makes fun of all of them.
He does. I think he loses a bit in the humanity category.
Maybe so.
If you look at Billy's wife, for example,
Valencia.
She's just a very two-dimensional woman who is, yes, the mother of his children. He married her, ended up financially gaining by marrying her. She's merely grateful to him for being the one to marry her because she was an overweight woman and never considered that she had any marriage proposals coming down the road to her. And so her gratitude at Billy being her husband pretty much colors her entire world.
It may be Vonnegut, in some ways, if we want to criticize the book, we say that Vonnegut's the only human being in the book. Everyone else is a cardboard cutout.
Right.
Yeah.
His daughter, who's a harpy,
yeah.
Really,
Barbara,
I'm trying to do the best for you, Dad, that I can, but you're being too difficult, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And the concern of a loving daughter is not one that he's showing us, and so it's really an out there picture. It's not an entire picture of a well-rounded character in Barbara. And really, who else does he have that
There aren't too many women in this book, Carrie.
No, there aren't. There aren't. Marie O'Hare becomes the closest we have to a well-rounded woman character.